The last thing I expected, when I told my steward to hire a new keeper for Grayville's East Wing, was that she would change everything. I had not been thinking about change. I had been thinking about the East Wing's inventory ledgers, which had gone untouched since the previous keeper resigned in the autumn, and about the draft that came through the corridor on cold mornings and woke Myra before she was ready to be awake. I had been thinking. In the practical and deliberate way I had trained myself to think about everything since my mate's death, about logistics. A keeper. Someone competent and quiet. Someone who would not require managing. The Grayville estate was large, and I had learned in the 14 months since Urin died that large houses required careful people or they became burdens. My steward Perk brought me 3 names. I chose the third without meeting her. Her letter of introduction was brief. A widow's daughter, trained in household management, recently arrived in Thornheld from the western settlements. No pack affiliation listed. No wolf. The letter was spare and exact, and something in its economy of words suited the mood I was in. Her name was Sira. She arrived on a Tuesday in early spring, when the last of the snow was still retreating from the Grayville grounds in slow gray patches. I did not go to meet her. That was not indifference. It was my established practice with household staff. Perk handled arrivals, showed new keepers their quarters, walked them through the wing's schedule. I had a council meeting that morning and 3 letters requiring reply, and my daughter's physician was due at the second hour to report on Myra's condition, which had not changed in 11 months and was not expected to change soon. Myra had stopped speaking the day after Urin's funeral. The physician had a name for it, a careful clinical phrase about grief responses in children and the complex mechanism by which the mind sometimes seals itself against unbearable things. I had listened to the phrase many times. I understood it. I did not find it useful. Myra was 5 years old, and she had watched me carry her mother's body from the hall, and something in her had gone very quiet, and no amount of clinical precision had brought it back. She communicated. That was what the physician always reminded me, with gentle emphasis, as though I needed reminding that my daughter was still present. She communicated, she pointed, she nodded. She occasionally wrote a word in careful crooked letters on the small slate she carried now everywhere. She ate when she was not too far inside whatever distance her grief kept. She slept, mostly. She played sometimes with the carved wooden wolves Perk had commissioned for her, arranging them in patterns on the floor of her room with an absorbed seriousness that made her look, for a moment, very much like her mother, who had also been serious and precise about the things that mattered to her. I did not know, on the Tuesday Sira arrived, that anything was about to shift. I was a man who had stopped expecting shifts. I ran my kingdom. I kept my daughter alive and as well as I could manage. I handled the estate and the council and the border territories and the seasonal disputes that required an alpha's mediation, and the constant, muffled pressure from the noble families and the council members who felt, with increasing urgency, that Solvenmir's king required a new mate and a clearer line of succession. I handled all of it. I did not expect anything from it beyond the handling. The first time I saw Sira was 3 days after her arrival, in the corridor outside the East Wing's linen stores. She was carrying a large bundle of folded wool, the heavier curtains from the upper rooms, which she had apparently taken down for washing without being asked, having noticed they were dusty, and she was walking with the focused efficiency of someone who knew exactly where she was going and was not interested in being stopped. I was coming from the direction of the study. We almost collided. She stopped. The wool stayed perfectly balanced in her arms. "My Lord King," she said. She inclined her head, not a bow, just a respectful tilt, careful and unhurried. Her voice was low and even. "Keeper," I said. She waited to see if I had anything further. When I did not, she inclined her head again and continued past me toward the laundry. That was the whole of it. I went on to the study. I thought nothing of it. I am telling the truth when I say that. She was quiet, she was capable, She was attending to her work without direction. This was exactly what I had wanted. I filed her away as a successful hire and returned to the letters. What I did not know then, and would not understand for some time, was that something in my wolf had already noticed. Not loudly, nothing sudden or dramatic, no howl, no pull, no flare of heat or instinct. My wolf had been quiet for a long time. He had gone still when Urin died, not because he had loved her in the way of a true mate. We had known what we were from the beginning, a practical pairing, a counsel-brokered alliance that had grown into genuine warmth and respect, and then loss, real loss, the kind that leaves a permanent quiet in a room. But because grief does something to a wolf, it teaches him to be careful with wanting. Mine had learned that lesson very well. What he did in the corridor outside the linen stores was nothing dramatic. He simply paid attention, the way a wolf does when something crosses the wind that his rider has not yet learned to name. I would not understand that until much later. Myra found Sira on a Wednesday, the fourth day. I learned about it from Perk, who told me with his characteristic careful neutrality, as though he were reporting a weather event. The young miss spent some time near the east wing this afternoon, my lord. The keeper Sira was folding the curtains in the drying room. Miss Myra sat in the doorway for approximately an hour. I looked up from the border report I was reading. She stayed an hour. Yes, my lord. Myra rarely stayed anywhere for an hour. She moved between rooms in the way of very small people who are sad, briefly, lightly, as though she were testing whether each room still had anything in it for her before moving on. An hour in one doorway was notable. Did anything happen? I asked. The keeper folded the curtains, Perk said. She did not speak to Miss Myra. She did not look up from her work. Miss Myra watched her fold. After approximately an hour, Miss Myra left and went to her room for her rest. I considered this. Thank you, Perk. He left. I sat for a moment with the border report in my hands, not reading it. That evening I went to Myra's room at the usual hour. She was in bed, her carved wolves arranged on the coverlet beside her in their habitual semicircle, the largest in the center. I sat in the chair by the bed and read to her. We had a book of old stories, a thick illustrated volume that Urin had chosen when Myra was very small, and I read from it every evening. Myra watched me with her serious dark eyes. She did not speak. She never did. But when I closed the book and kissed her forehead and told her good night, she reached out and pressed her palm briefly against my hand before withdrawing it. It was a small thing. She did it sometimes. I had learned to receive it for what it was. I went to my own rooms and stood at the window looking out at the Grayville grounds, at the dark line of the northern pines, and thought about a woman folding curtains in silence while my daughter watched. The second week brought its own revelations, small and incremental. Myra began appearing near the east wing with greater regularity. Not intruding, she had always been, even before Urin died, a child who understood space and did not insert herself where she was not wanted. She simply positioned herself in proximity, doorways mostly. The corridor near the linen stores. Once, the bench outside the east wing's small kitchen, where Sira was apparently in the habit of sitting for a few minutes with her morning tea before the household was fully awake. I know about the bench because I saw it myself by accident passing through the corridor earlier than usual one morning. Myra was seated at the far end of the bench. Sira was at the other end. They were not sitting together. There was a deliberate, respectful distance between them. Sira was holding her tea in both hands and looking at the garden through the window. Myra was doing the same. Neither of them spoke, obviously. But the quality of Myra's silence, I noticed it. I had become, in 14 months, an expert in the textures of my daughter's silence. This one was different. It was not the heavy, sealed silence of grief, the one that sat on her like something with weight. It was something lighter, a quiet that was resting rather than hiding. I did not interrupt them. I went to the study and sat down at my desk and opened the morning's correspondence and did not open any of it for several minutes. Something in my chest was doing something I could not name. It was not dramatic. It was not the pull of a bond newly igniting. I knew what that felt like from the old stories, the ones the council told about first recognition, the burning mark, the wave of certainty. It was nothing like that. It was much quieter, like a warmth behind glass that I had somehow walked past many times without understanding there was a window there at all. I asked Perk to tell me more about her. He was discreet about it, he always was. She was 28, widowed 2 years prior. Her husband, a tradesman from the western settlements, had died of fever. No children, no family remaining in the western territories. Her mother had died some years before that, and she had been managing alone since. She had worked as a keeper in 2 other households before Grayville, both good references, both noting her quietness and her competence and her habit of doing things before they were asked. No pack affiliation, no wolf. She was what the older families would have called a plain woman, not in the way of appearance, which was not for me to note, but in the way of standing. No bloodline claim, no title, no position in the ordering of things that my council, or the noble families, would have considered significant. She was, in the estimation of everyone in this kingdom who tracked such things, nobody. I folded Perk's report. "Thank you," I said. He left with the same careful neutrality he brought to everything. He was a good steward. He did not tell me what to think about the information he had gathered. I did not know what I thought about it. I put it aside. I had a kingdom to run. The 3rd week, Myra ate her supper. This was not, in itself, remarkable. My daughter did eat, had continued to eat through the months of her silence, though erratically and without appetite, and the physician was always careful to note that her physical health was maintained. But she had been having a difficult stretch. 3 days of almost nothing, pushing plates away, sleeping too long in the middle of the day. On the Wednesday of the 3rd week, Perk informed me that Miss Myra had eaten her full supper for the first time in several days. Was there a change in what was served? I asked. No, my lord, the same menu as previous evenings. He paused. Perk's pauses always meant something. The keeper Sira brought the tray. There was a small arrangement of pressed wildflowers on the side. She had placed them on the tray herself. I was quiet for a moment. Myra ate everything? I asked. Everything, my lord, and drank her milk. She arranged the wildflowers in a line beside the tray afterward. She kept them. I looked at the window for a moment. Very good, I said. Thank you, Perk. I am a king. I am not a man accustomed to being moved by small things, and yet the image of my daughter arranging those pressed wildflowers in a careful line beside her tray, keeping them, came back to me several times that evening, uninvited and insistent. What I want to say about those weeks, the weeks before I understood anything, is that they were very quiet ones. Not empty. Quiet in the way of something growing slowly beneath frozen ground, when you cannot yet see it but the earth is already doing the work. Sira did not seek me out. She did not position herself near me, as some of the household staff did, or find small reasons to bring things to my attention. She was competent and contained and invisible in the way that the most capable people often are. She solved problems before they became problems, which meant I almost never heard about them until Perk mentioned, almost in passing, that the East Wing's draft issue had been resolved. She had located the source, a gap in the joining of a window frame, and arranged the repair herself, or that the schedule for the seasonal linen rotation had been quietly restructured so that nothing fell between shifts, or that the corridor outside Myra's room was now always warm in the morning, because Sira had identified that the grate was being let down too early and had adjusted the timing. She did not do these things for recognition. I was not certain she thought about recognition at all. She did them the way she did everything, with the calm, unannounced efficiency of someone who found it simpler to attend to a thing than to explain why it needed attending to. My wolf noticed every one of them. He did not say anything about them. He simply kept his attention there, turned in her direction like a compass point that had found its north and was not confused about it, even if the man holding the compass had not yet looked at the needle. There were, during these weeks, complications of the political variety. The Wolf Moon Feast was 6 weeks out. In Solvenmere, the Wolf Moon Feast was the kingdom's central event, an annual gathering of the noble families, the council members, the pack representatives from the outlying territories, and the Alpha King, who was expected to appear not merely as a ruler, but as the symbolic heart of the kingdom's continuity. This meant, in practical terms, that every year the council used the Wolf Moon Feast as the occasion to surface whatever matter they considered most pressing with respect to the Alpha King's personal life. This year, the matter was Vesna Caldwell. Vesna was the eldest daughter of Lord Caldwell of the Marin Holding, a large, established family with strong pack bloodlines and considerable land in the Eastern Territories. She was 26, accomplished, reportedly kind, and had been presented to me at 3 separate functions in the past 8 months in what the council clearly considered an unmistakably transparent manner. She was an appropriate candidate by every measure the noble families used to evaluate such things. She had a wolf. She had standing. She had a family name that would mean something to the packs. My council convened to formally propose her at the beginning of the 5th week. Councillor Reed, who had the most seniority and therefore the most confidence in telling me things I had not asked to be told, laid the case out clearly. Solvenmere needed the clarity of a succession line. Myra was young, and her condition made the matter more pressing, not less. Lady Vesna was available, suitable, and had indicated, through the appropriate intermediaries, that she would not be averse to the arrangement. I listened. I did not disagree with anything they said. I will consider it before the feast, I told them. This satisfied no one, but they had learned over the years that I did not do things faster than I intended to, and pressing me produced only a longer silence, so they withdrew and left me to my consideration. I considered nothing. I put it in the part of my mind where I put things I was not ready to look at, and returned to the border reports. That evening I went to Myra's room. She was awake, sitting on the floor with her carved wolves. She had arranged them differently than usual, not in the habitual semicircle, but in a loose cluster facing a single point, the way wolves do when they have found something worth attending to together. I sat on the floor beside her and watched for a moment. "What are they looking at?" I asked. She considered this. Then she pointed to the empty space in front of them. I looked at the empty space for a moment, then I looked at her. She was looking at it too, with the composed seriousness of a child for whom the empty space was not empty. It was Perk who told me, on the Friday of the 5th week, that Miss Myra had begun writing on her slate again. She had not used the slate in months. She had carried it. She kept it tied to a ribbon around her small wrist and had refused to put it down, but she had not written on it since the 1st month after Urin died, when she had written, in her careful crooked letters, Mama, and then had wiped it clean immediately, as though she had surprised herself, and had not written again. "What did she write?" I asked. Perk cleared his throat with a precision that suggested the answer required some delicacy. "She wrote one word, my lord. When the keeper was attending to the corridor near her room, she held up the slate." "What word?" I asked. "The keeper's name," Perk said. "Sira, in her letters, the keeper saw it. She told me she looked at it for a moment, and then she said, and I quote the keeper exactly, 'My lord, that's my name. You wrote it very well.' And Miss Myra wiped the slate clean." I sat with that for a long moment. "Did Myra do anything after?" I asked. "She put the slate ribbon back around her wrist and went into her room for her rest," Perk said. The keeper continued with the corridor. I put my palms flat on the desk. "Thank you, Perk," I said very quietly. He left. I sat at the desk for a long time. The window behind me had the last of the afternoon light coming through it, and it was warm on my back, and I sat very still and thought about my daughter writing a word on her slate for the first time in 11 months. Thought about what word she had chosen. My wolf inside me was doing something I had not felt him do in a very long time. He was not howling, not pulling, not surging. He was simply present, fully awake in a way that had nothing frantic in it, still and warm and paying attention, the way he had been in the corridor that first morning, but now the sensation was clearer. Like finding, after a long time in a dark room, that there was a lamp in the corner that had been burning the whole time. A lantern behind glass, warm, steady, perfectly still, as though it had been burning there for years and I had only just turned to face the window. I sought her out the next morning. I want to record this honestly. I did not plan to. I was walking the east wing. I did it sometimes in the early morning, a habit of the years when I had been more present in the household's daily workings, before the weight of the kingdom, and then the weight of grief had settled into a different pattern. I was not looking for anything. I simply found myself in the corridor near the small kitchen at an hour when the household was only beginning to stir. She was at the bench, same posture as the morning I had seen her with Myra, tea in both hands, looking at the garden. The bench was long enough that there was considerable space on either side of her. I stopped at a reasonable distance. She looked up. "My Lord King," she said, the same low, even voice, the same respectful tilt of the head. "Good morning," I said. There was a pause of the comfortable sort, not awkward, merely waiting. "Will you sit?" she asked, and then quickly, "Forgive me, that was presumptuous. You need—" "No," I said, "I will." I sat on the far end of the bench. The distance was appropriate. The garden was gray and early, and had the particular stillness of spring mornings before the birds had properly started. We sat for a moment. "My daughter wrote your name," I said. I had not planned to say this either. It came out of some region in me that had been holding it since Perk's report. She was quiet for a moment. "She did," she said. "She hasn't written anything in almost a year." "I know," she said, and then, "I didn't do anything to encourage it." I wasn't sure if I should have responded differently, or— "You said exactly the right thing," I told her. Another pause. She was looking at the garden. I was looking at the garden also, which made it easier to speak. "She's been very quiet," I said. It was an absurd understatement, and something in my tone must have communicated this, because Sierra's expression shifted not to pity, which I could not have borne, but to something quieter and more careful than pity. "She's here," Sierra said. "That's not nothing. She's entirely here. She watches everything. She misses nothing. She's just waiting to be ready to put it into words again." I looked at her then. She was still looking at the garden. "How do you know that?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Then I know because that was me once, after my husband died. For about 3 months I couldn't put anything into words. I didn't stop being present. I was just waiting to be ready." The garden was very still. Something in my chest was doing that thing again, the warmth, the lantern quality, the sense of something already present that I had not known to look for. "And then you were ready," I said. "And then I was ready," she confirmed. She took a sip of her tea. "Your daughter will be too. She's braver than she knows." I thought about Myra's wolves arranged in their cluster, all of them facing the same empty point. Thought about her holding up that slate with Sierra's name written on it, in careful crooked letters. "Yes," I said. "I believe she is." We sat in the garden stillness for another few minutes. Then I thanked her and went to the study, and I sat at my desk, and I did not open anything on it for quite some time. The 6th week arrived, and with it, the Wolf Moon feast preparations and the full weight of the council's expectations. Perk managed the preparations with his customary thoroughness. The great hall was to be dressed formally, the long tables, the pack standards, the candles in the iron holders that ran the length of the hall. Representatives from all 11 noble families had confirmed attendance. Lady Vesna Caldwell and her father would be seated at the head table, at the council's very deliberate arrangement. I went through the preparations with my attention divided, which was not like me. I was precise by nature and by training, a man who reviewed guest lists and seating charts and the symbolic language of feast arrangements with the same concentration he gave to treaty negotiations. But in those last days before the Wolf Moon Feast, I kept finding my attention sliding sideways, toward things that were not on any guest list. Toward the East Wing, where I knew Sira was preparing the secondary guest quarters for the overflow of attendees, with the same unannounced competence she brought to everything. Toward Myra, who had written 2 more words on her slate in the past week. One of them was wolves, the other was warm. I thought about what she had written and what it meant, whether it meant anything beyond the literal, whether I was constructing significance where there was only a child recovering gradually, at her own pace, finding her way back through small familiar words. My wolf did not think I was constructing anything. My wolf had been paying attention this whole time, and he was no longer simply still. He was patient in the way of something that has been waiting and has begun to understand that the waiting is almost done. The night before the feast, I went to Myra's room as usual and read to her. She was already in bed, her wolves arranged around her. When I reached the end of the passage I had been reading, she reached for her slate, which was lying on the coverlet beside the largest carved wolf. She held it up. She had written, "Is she coming?" I looked at the words for a moment, then I looked at my daughter. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. She looked at me with her serious, steady eyes. She did not write anything more. She did not need to. "I don't know," I told her honestly. "The feast is for the noble families and the council. Sira she keeps the house. The household staff don't generally attend the feast." Myra considered this. Then she looked at her slate, she wiped it, she wrote again. "She should." I sat with that for a long moment. "I'll see what can be arranged," I said. Myra looked at the largest carved wolf. She arranged it very precisely in the center of the semicircle. Then she lay down, and I covered her and kissed her forehead and told her good night, and I went to find Perk. I did not tell Perk the reason. I simply told him to add Sira to the feast, at the household staff table near the east corridor, not prominent, not conspicuous, just present. Perk noted this without expression and said it would be arranged. I also told him to send word to Lady Vesna's family that I would speak with Lord Caldwell at the feast, but that I had not yet reached a conclusion on the matter they had proposed, and he should not bring his daughter expecting a formal announcement. Perk paused, one of his meaningful ones. Then he said, "Yes, my lord," and went to make both arrangements, and I returned to my rooms. I want to be honest about what I was thinking that night. I was not thinking with any kind of clarity. I was a man who prided himself on clarity, on the ability to see a situation as it was and respond to it in proportion, without the distortion of sentiment or impatience. But that night, in the hours before the Wolf Moon Feast, I sat at my window and looked at the northern pines and acknowledged, quietly and without ceremony, that something had shifted in me. That the lantern I had noticed behind the glass was not going away. That my wolf, who had been learning patience for 14 months, had in fact been patient for a reason, and he had known the reason longer than I had. I did not know what to do about it. I was a king, and she was a keeper with no standing, no pack affiliation, no wolf. The council would have things to say, they always had things to say. The noble families would have things to say. The careful political architecture of Salvanmir's succession, which the council had been building for months, would need to be addressed. I thought about Myra's slate, she should. I thought about my daughter eating her supper because there were pressed wildflowers on the tray, writing a word for the first time in 11 months, sitting in a doorway for an hour, in a silence that was resting rather than hiding. I thought about a woman looking at the garden with tea in both hands and saying, She's entirely here. She watches everything. She's just waiting to be ready. I closed the window against the night air. I went to bed. I slept better than I had in a long time. The Wolf Moon feast arrived on a cold, clear evening in early spring, when the sky was the particular deep blue of a night that has decided to be beautiful about it. The great hall filled by the second bell, the noble families arriving in their established order, the pack representatives from the outlying territories taking their places, the council members assembling with the formality they always brought to occasions that required them to feel significant. The iron candle holders along the hall's length were lit, and the light they cast was warm and directional, the kind of light that made the hall feel both larger and more intimate than it was, the shadows retreating to the high vaulted ceiling. I stood at the head of the hall and greeted the families as they arrived, Lord Caldwell and Lady Vesna among them, the latter composed and poised, and I thought, rather more prepared for a formal announcement than I had hoped my message to her father would have prevented. The council's arrangement of the seating was exactly what I had expected. Lady Vesna at the head table, positioned 2 seats to my left, in the position that carried obvious symbolic weight. I took my place. The feast began. I was, through the first hours of it, performing the function of an alpha king at his kingdom's central gathering, greeting, speaking, listening, managing the currents of conversation and political implication that moved through a gathering like this one the way weather moves through a landscape. I was good at it. I had been trained to it since boyhood. It did not require my full attention, which meant that some portion of my attention was elsewhere, as it had increasingly been in the past weeks. I found her near the end of the hall, at the household staff table by the east corridor, as Perk had arranged. She was seated between 2 of the senior household staff, people she would have known, people who ran the larger house operations. She was in a dress I had not seen before, a deep blue-gray that was quietly appropriate for the occasion. She was not looking at me. Myra was seated at the far edge of the head table, which had been my insistence over the council's gentle suggestion that a child of her condition might find the feast overwhelming. Myra had attended the Wolf Moon feast every year of her life. She was not overwhelmed by it. She sat with her customary composed seriousness, the carved wolves absent too informal for the feast, Perk had said, and she had accepted this without protest, her slate ribbon tied at her wrist. She had been watching the room since the moment she arrived, in the way she always watched things completely, carefully, missing nothing. I noticed when she found Sira. I watched my daughter's face change, not dramatically, not in the way of a child who has spotted something startling, but in the quiet way of someone who has been looking for a particular light in a room and has now confirmed that it is there. Her expression settled. Her shoulders dropped slightly, very slightly. She folded her small hands on the table and returned to watching the room. Something in me settled too. The difficulty with what happened next is that it was neither planned nor theatrical. It was simply true, and it arrived in the way that true things sometimes do, quietly and all at once, and without any preparation. Councillor Reed rose at the midpoint of the feast to make the formal address he made every year, an account of the kingdom's year, the state of the territories, the matters pending and the matters resolved. He was thorough and not brief. The hall listened with the polite attention of an audience that had heard this speech in many versions over many years. Then Reed pivoted to the matter of succession. He did it with the ceremony it required, the ritual language of the Alpha King's responsibilities, the continuity of Salvanmir's bloodline, the honor of the assembled families and their long partnership with the crown. He spoke Lady Vesna Caldwell's name, and her father straightened at the head table, and Lady Vesna herself, to her credit, remained composed. The council members along the table's side had the barely concealed satisfaction of people who have arranged something and are watching it arrive. I was preparing the words of a measured, non-committal response, the kind I had given on 3 previous occasions when the council had pressed this matter, when I heard it. It came from the far edge of the head table, very small, very clear. One word. Zero. The hall went quiet the way halls do when something happens that has not been in any script. Not a shocked quiet, not yet, more the reflexive silence of 200 people who have all simultaneously registered that something unexpected has occurred and are waiting to understand what it was. I turned. Myra was standing. She had pushed back her chair with the focused deliberateness of a 5-year-old who has decided something and is committed to it. She was looking down the length of the hall toward the household staff table by the east corridor, and her face had a quality I had not seen on it in 14 months, open and unguarded and completely certain. She said the word again, louder, Sierra. The hall stayed quiet. I watched Sierra stand from her place at the household staff table. She did not look at me. She was looking at Myra, the way she always looked at my daughter, with that patient, complete attention that asked for nothing and offered everything. She rose and walked the length of the hall without hurrying, through the silence of 200 people who did not know what they were witnessing, but understood it was something. She reached the far end of the head table and crouched down to Myra's level. Myra took her hand. The silence in the hall was now a different quality. It had gone from puzzled to transfixed, the way a room shifts when something is happening in it that is larger than the occasion that was planned. And then I was standing. I did not decide to stand. I was standing. My wolf, who had been patient for 14 months and watchful for 6 weeks and warm and steady and waiting, was done waiting, and I was standing and walking the length of my own table toward the far end where my daughter held Sierra's hand. The hall watched. I stopped in front of her. She straightened slowly, still holding Myra's hand, and looked at me. Her face was calm. It was always calm, but her eyes, close up and in the candlelight, had something in them I had not seen there before, a kind of still, contained recognition, as though she, too, had understood something that had been becoming clear for a long time. I held out my hand to her. She looked at it, then she looked at me. The question was quiet and present in her expression, not afraid of the answer, simply asking it with the honesty that was native to her. I said quietly enough that it was not for the hall, though the hall was very quiet. You should be here. Myra was right. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she placed her hand in mine. The mark came the way the old stories described it, not painfully, not dramatically, but with a certainty that had no room in it for doubt. A warmth that spread from the point where our palms met, and the mark itself, which I had not worn since I was young and not yet mated and my wolf had searched in the usual way. It surfaced on my wrist in the amber gold of the old faded bond marks, the ones the kingdom had not seen in 2 generations, and Sierra drew in a breath because it was on her palm too, the same amber gold light. And we both looked at it for a moment with the mutual expression of 2 people, confirming something they had begun to suspect. The hall saw it. They could not help seeing it. Faded bond marks do not present themselves subtly. They carry their own light, the kind that reads in a room the way a candle reads in a dark corner. The silence acquired a new texture, not shock exactly, something more like the intake of breath before acknowledgement, the moment when 200 people who have just witnessed an undeniable thing are deciding how to hold it. Councillor Reed was very still. Lord Caldwell was very still. Lady Vesna, to her lasting credit, was looking at the marks on our hands with an expression that held, I thought, more relief than disappointment. I turned to face the hall. I kept Sierra's hand in mine. The Wolf Moon Feast is a gathering of the kingdom's families, I said. My voice in the great hall was the voice I used when I wanted it to carry, which was not a loud voice but a clear one. It is also a gathering of the kingdom's truth. Solvenmere does not require arrangements and alliances. It requires its alpha king to know his own fated mate. I paused. I did not know 6 weeks ago. I know now. I looked at Reed. The council will find this inconvenient. They may address their inconvenience to me at their convenience, and I will hear it with my usual patience. Reed, who had survived 20 years of my father's reign and 12 of mine, absorbed this with the expression of a man who has learned to recognize when an argument is already over. I looked at the hall, at the noble families, at the pack representatives, at the council members with their careful faces, at Perk, standing near the side door, who had the contained expression of a man who had perhaps suspected something of this order, and was unsurprised that it had arrived at the Wolf Moon feast. "I name her," I said, the formal words, the ones that preceded acclaiming in Salvanmir's tradition, the Alpha King's declaration before the assembled kingdom that could not be retracted or renegotiated or managed by councils. "She is my fated mate. She will be the Lady of Greyville and the Alpha's mate of Salvanmir. Those who have standing to object may speak to me before I return to this hall tomorrow." I looked at Sira then. Her face was still calm. But the calm had something in it now that had not been there before, warmer, deeper. Something that had been patient for a long time and had just been given permission to stop being patient. "You don't have to say anything," I said quietly. "Not tonight, not until you're ready." She looked at me. "I've been ready," she said. "I've been waiting for you to be." The hall was still very quiet. Myra, who had been watching all of this with the focused absorption of a child who has arranged something important and is satisfied with how it has gone, slid her small hand between ours. Not claiming, not needing to be held, simply placing herself in the connection between us, her small fingers between my hand and Sira's, as though closing a circuit she had always intended to close. I felt the circuit close. The great hall of Greyville, with its iron candles and its pack standards and its 200 witnesses in their feast day clothes, went on being very quiet. And then, from somewhere near the back, one of the pack representatives from the Northern Territories, a man I had known since my boyhood, a man who had seen my father claim my mother in this same hall, there came a sound. A low, sustained sound, like a bow drawn slowly across a string, and the pack representatives on either side of him took it up, and the people in the hall began, one by one, to rise. Not the formal bow of ceremony. The old bow, the deep one, the one the packs give when something destined has been confirmed and the right order of things has been restored. The one that goes to the bone before the brain and requires no instruction. The council rose. The noble families rose. Lord Caldwell rose and Lady Vesna beside him. Perk, near the side door, bowed with the precision and the genuine warmth of a man who has managed a house through grief and is very glad to see something growing in it again. The hall bowed to Sira. She stood very still. Her hand was in mine. Myra's small hand was between us. I did not look at the hall. I was looking at her. There is an image I carry with me now, as a man who has learned to carry good things alongside the weight of everything else. It is not the hall, or the marks, or the sound of the pack's bow going through the stone floor like a tide. It is the three of us, much later, after the feast had wound down and the hall had emptied, and the candles had burned to their stubs, and the night had settled into the particular silence of a large house after a large event. Myra had fallen asleep between us on the bench by the east corridor's window, the bench where I had found Sira on the morning I had first been honest enough with myself to go looking, and she was sleeping with the deep, uncomplicated sleep of a child who has done something she intended and is satisfied with it. Sira was looking at the garden. The marks on both our wrists were the low amber gold of something that had confirmed itself and no longer needed to announce itself. I said without quite planning to, "What did you tell her before you knew anything?" When she first started sitting in the doorways. Sira thought about it. "I didn't tell her anything," she said. "I just kept doing the work. I thought if I was just present and quiet, she'd decide when she was ready. You can't rush someone who's waiting to be ready." I looked at her. She said that to me, I said. Almost exactly those words on her slate. Sierra looked at me then. Something moved in her face, startled and then soft, the way you look when you realize a child has been paying closer attention than you knew. She's braver than she knows, Sierra said very quietly. I looked at my daughter, asleep between us. At the carved wolves she had eventually been allowed to bring in from the entry hall, where Perk had been keeping them in a quiet conspiracy with Myra, and which were now arranged on the bench beside her in their cluster, all of them facing the same direction, facing Sierra, I noticed, or the point where Sierra was sitting. She always knew where she was looking, I said. Myra's small hand had found its way to Sierra's in her sleep. The amber gold of the bond mark was warm in the window's reflected light. I thought about a child who had not spoken for almost a year, and who had chosen, on the evening that mattered, to speak one word clearly in a room full of 200 people waiting for a different answer, because she had known, with the uncomplicated certainty of a 5-year-old who misses nothing, that the right answer was already in the room, folding curtains in the east wing and drinking tea on the bench and placing wildflowers on supper trays without being asked. She had known before I did. She should. I reached across and covered both their hands with mine, Sierra's, and Myra's sleeping one, and the lantern behind the glass, which had been burning quietly for longer than I knew, was warm and steady and entirely without doubt. It was enough. It was, I thought, exactly enough.